David Moyes did quite a remarkable thing against Liverpool last night. He managed to find a situation which sort of suited nobody and pissed everybody off. Found a way to sort of demotivate players that were usually involved in the first team, players that were on the fringes, and then also the young players. Honestly, one fell swoop. He just managed to do it everywhere. I think the problem with David Moyes is, whilst he's clearly an adept manager who's managed throughout the years, I think sometimes his man management can be called into question because he doesn't understand how people think. I'm quite certain of that and have been for some time. I don't subscribe to the theory that he's lost all the dressing room any time it happens, because I think it depends on who you are. If you're in David Moyes' club, so to speak, which is probably the most boring nightclub you could ever possibly visit, but if you are in Club Moyes, then you're probably okay. I don't think Edson Alvarez is annoyed with David Moyes, for instance. I don't think Jarrod Bowen is. I could go along and make a list of players who I think are okay with David Moyes, and for that reason, he doesn't lose the dressing room. What he does do, unfortunately, is he manages to lose almost everybody else. And I think on this instance, I would sort of include the travelling fans on that. I don't want to go too much about it because it wasn't me that made the effort to drive up there. So, it's not for me to play the victim in all of this. I really wasn't. I sat down and watched it from the discomfort. It was a fraudulent slip. The discomfort of my own sofa, actually, and it was pretty poor showing. That was for sure. David Moyes managed to find a halfway house where he got the worst of both worlds last night, and it was pretty bad. And his comments that he played that system to try and give the fringe players a chance is utter. Actually, it's utter bullshit. It's just crap. And I would like to say to him, nobody believes that. That's not what happened. Look, David Moyes just didn't have the courage of his convictions to totally throw the game. So he sort of did a half measure of it, really. Moyes had no desire to progress in that tournament. David Moyes was absolutely a victim of his own lack of rotation, which is why so many people are knackered. He managed last night to alienate the young players. He managed to make some of his second choice players like Angelo Ogbonna look absolutely, and side Benrahma, we'll get into more detail in a second, look absolutely inept and out of their depth. So they would have been totally demotivated. And he also managed to knacker at least 3 of his players ahead of a really important game against Manchester United. I just think either go for it or don't. I don't think too many people are reading too much into this whole illness thing either. I think there was a lot of excuses there. But let's talk about these fringe players. David Moyes wanted to give his fringe players a chance. Well, that's in total contradiction to what he does. The words that are coming out of his mouth do not match the actions. They just don't, because he doesn't give his fringe players every chance. Because the fact of the matter is, they weren't ready. That's the first thing. Let's just look at fitness before we look at tactics. Because fitness, they were not ready because they're not involved enough. And he has absolutely destroyed the confidence of so many of these players. Be they Pablo Fornals, Said Benrahma, Attilo Kehrer. Now, you don't have to agree or even think that these are really, really good players. However, and you don't even have to agree that they should be in the first team all the time, but to take that to its fullest extent, you'd have to think that we only need 11 players, that we're never going to have to call on these players. Well, of course we do. And they're so demotivated, they are actually the very essence of the shell of themselves. In fact, that's all they are, a little husk, a little ghost, a little spirit, a little essence of what they used to be. Because they've just had the motivation completely and utterly knocked out of them. Somebody asked in the chat, I can't even remember exactly what it was, but something along the lines of, in the build-up show, what would certain players have to do to get a place in the team? And it didn't feel like the question was asked cynically. It felt as if the question was asked honestly. It was almost a case of, maybe if Benrahma gets in the team and plays really well, he'll get into the team. He won't. None of these players will, and they know it. So they're not motivated. They basically know that they were cannon fodder. That's what they were. Literally sacrificial lambs going out. Well, not literally, because they would have to be lambs, but you know what I mean? They were the proverbial sacrificial lambs going out there, just so as bodies could be put on the line to surrender against Liverpool. That's all I can say. Now, that's the situation, I think, with some of the management and some of the lack of motivation. Tactically, it is completely and utterly unfair to put players like Angelo Ogbonna and Thomas Souček into a situation where you're going to play like that against a high press, where you need people that think quick, move quick, and pass quick on one touch. What you're doing is you're putting those players into a situation whereby they're going to get frustrated because they can't do what your tactics are asking them to do. Thomas Souček has many qualities. Arriving late into the box, heading the ball, many qualities. He really does. Moving the ball quickly, moving himself quickly, and playing one-touch football is not one of the assets that he has. And that's on David Moyes for A, selecting him, and B, for not ensuring that there was adequate cover there. And that's not many occasions when I've looked at Thomas Souček and seen him throwing his arms up in the air. Well, I saw it twice last night. He was completely... Now, he was either knackered, he was completely fed up, possibly a combination of both. Now, the man's a machine. He can play probably more football than anyone else in our squad, but that doesn't mean you have to do it. If I were one of the young players as well, there's certain watershed moments, I do believe, in every point during a season. Look, you want to win every game, but sometimes there's a symbolism to a game. And I think that it became symbolic for some of the younger players last night the moment David Moyes wanted to rotate his squad. Because I think by his actions, by his demonstrations, he really showed he wasn't that interested. That the single substitution of Lucas Paquetá would demonstrate that. If he really wanted to go for that game, there would have been 3 subs. Even if what he wanted to do was rest early on and go for the game later on at half-time, it was quite clear what was going on. He would have made 3 or 4 subs at half-time, really gone for it. He didn't. He brought 1 on. There was no big tactical switch or anything like that. And the reason I think it's symbolic and I think it's pivotal, because I think those young players would have looked at that and thought, okay, we're not getting a chance here. It doesn't matter how well they play, and they are dominant in every competition. I'm not going to bore you with all the fine details of every competition they're in. But in the Cup, in Premier League 2, in the European competition, when they play against the teams that are in League 1 and League 2, these lads, these young men are completely dominant, and there's nothing they can do to get into the team. And then you look at some of the players, so they'll be completely demotivated today. The fans that travelled up, they'll be completely demotivated. I have a feeling, I don't know, I don't want to speak for Kudus and Bowen, and, I wouldn't be surprised if they're thinking, what was the point in chucking us in with that gaffer if you're not going to support us? Look, your job as a manager, and I don't mean a football manager, any manager of anything, is to create an environment where people can thrive, to give them the support that they need, the machinery that they need, if it's in industry, whatever the case may be. He did not do that. It wasn't as bad as Sam Allardyce, what Sam Allardyce did, but it was a pretty poor show. And I feel a little bit sheepish because, I spoke during the week, did an interview, and I said the one thing I'm grateful for with David Moyes is I waited a long time for a manager to take these cups seriously and go for them. And I said that. I wasn't saying it to be tricky with my words. I believe it to be the case, and I was expecting him to go for it. I really did. When I said David Moyes is going to put out a strong team, I expect only Mavropanos to be the only change. I believed it. I really did. And the thing is, people will say David Moyes is damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. No, he's really not. You can rotate against a team like that. But for him to say that I wanted to give my fringe players a chance, he didn't, because those fringe players are completely and utterly underprepared because of the way he's managed them. Because I go back to it only because it's the best example, but there are loads of examples. The best and most recent examples: Crystal Palace and Tottenham. 1 substitute, 87 minutes. Pablo Fornals. You do look. Number one, you want to be in a position where you can rotate more than that to give players a rest, so you don't have a situation where you get to Liverpool and have to change everyone pretty much. And secondly, you don't want to be in an 87th minute substitute. You're probably thinking, what's the point? What was the point? He'll already be demotivated because he thought he was off to Sevilla. That's what Pablo Fornals was thinking. He's got a young family. He's not needed or wanted at West Ham. He's given everything for the club, by the way, Fornals. So imagine that. You give everything, but you're not wanted. So actually your contract is coming to an end. You're thinking, okay, this is great. At least I can get back to Spain, get back home, take the family, get the kids back enrolled in a Spanish school, and so on and so forth. And then West Ham go and exercise the 1 year option. I don't blame the club for doing it. I'm just saying, imagine yourself in Pablo Fornals' position, completely demotivated. And again, you've got the shell, the husk of a player. He was bloody awful yesterday, but he was far from on his own. That's got to be demotivating for Thomas Souček to play in that team for different reasons. Sorry, I'd sort of digressed there because we're talking about the fringe players. Angelo Ogbonna, he deserves better than that, quite frankly. I don't know. I don't know what's gone on with Thilo Kehrer, but he should have been started at centre-back ahead of Ogbonna. I'm not saying that any one of these things makes a difference, but collectively, they make all the difference in the world. It's one thing getting trounced by Liverpool. It's another getting trounced by Liverpool. Pretty much half a Liverpool team, and he's then bringing on kids. Klopp's then bringing on kids. We don't. And then you look at Benrahma. And we did a video last night. We did a little patron call-in show. It was me and my old man. And my old man said that Benrahma looked petrified. He does. Well, they all do, don't they? And this is the point, really. Does David Moyes lose the dressing room? No, not all of it. Does he demotivate large chunks of it? Absolutely, 100%. And I thought it was an awful thing to do. And it was disingenuous of him to say that, because David Moyes doesn't want to give. This is the thing. This is why we know it to be a lie. David Moyes doesn't want to give his fringe players a chance to prove that they can get into the first team. Because number one, they can't get into the first team. Number two, he doesn't create an environment where they can. If he honestly wanted to give his fringe players a chance, he wouldn't demonstrate it with one game against Liverpool. He'd be demonstrating it time and time again. 15 minutes here, half an hour there. And everyone would feel integrated. Everything would feel part of things. I don't know if you remember this. So years ago, there was a situation. I can't even remember under which manager. It might have been Capello. Could have been. Don't know. Can't remember. But I remember the story. And it was that there was a big clique in the England squad, and it's a suggestion that at dinner time, the players who would be in the first team would sit on a different table to everybody that was in the squad. And I think even within that table, as I understand it, I might have this wrong, it was heavily loaded with Arsenal players and Man United players. So even on the main first team table, they were almost segregated and mixing amongst themselves. And then sort of the other players who might have come from whatever, Aston Villa or, some of the other clubs, they were separate. It was very much a hierarchy. And I think even just a case of going to dinner highlighted and demonstrated to the players that if you're on that table, you've got no chance of playing. It's a bad environment to create, and I'm not suggesting West Ham do that at dinner time in the canteen. That's not. But I would imagine there is a similar feeling amongst players who aren't involved and aren't invested in it. And I didn't think I'd care that much the day after, but I do, because I do think it was. I think there was a bit. It's a bit duplicitous, actually, but particularly in what he said. I think in allowing the fans to go up there thinking that we might actually be going for it, and indicating and suggesting that he might be giving the players a chance, the fringe players a chance. I think in the way that he's demotivated everybody, in the way he sort of throw some of his first team players were thrown to the wolves on that one. Thomas Souček Thomas Souček had no business playing in that game. Look, there's two things you can do when you're playing against that high press. I say two, as far as I'm aware. I haven't got me coaching badges, of course. But as far as I can see, you can do one of two things. You either play through it, that needs fast one-touch football, right, to get out of it. He can't do that. Or you need to launch it and hoof it long to a target man who can hold it up. We couldn't do either last night. There was no target man. It's poor old Jared Bowen up there. And as I say, I wouldn't be surprised. Look, he came away with a goal. Good on him. Well done. I've got no complaints. A lot of these individual players, I don't have a lot of complaints about. Even Benrahma, who produced probably one of the worst performances I've seen. I let him off a bit because he's been destroyed. He has. There's no doubt about it. He must be desperate to get out of West Ham. He must be. And he's not on his own. As I mentioned before, that David Moyes had a chance at Cup glory and he surrendered it. He really did. And I'm sure you'll hear from David Moyes and he'll tell you, West Ham fans, they've had it pretty good. I was told that in the week. But what we saw then was an indication of what the problem is. And the mainstream media will pull their punches. As I mentioned what Jamie Carragher had said. This is not a West Ham, it's not a David Moyes type performance. It was. He's very capable of that. He called it embarrassing. Jamie Carragher called it embarrassing. It was not good enough at half-time. They're saying West Ham won't attack. They're going out. I think Harry said they're going out with a whimper. So everybody says this stuff when they're analysing the games, but the mainstream media are not quite bold enough to say, actually, looking at it, we can understand a little bit why West Ham fans might be frustrated. They won't say that because they'll dare not criticise David Moyes. And I've got no problem criticising David Moyes. Do you know why? Because when we do well, I'll praise him. But that is completely and utterly unacceptable. And I'm far more worked up about it the day after than I actually thought I would be. Tell you something now. He's nailed his colours to the mast with that one. And he's done it before. And what he's basically saying is, well, listen, you can't trust the words that come out of his mouth, because I think most of those words were lies. Half-truths, lies, duplicity. I don't trust it. But what we can trust are his actions. And what are his actions? What words do his actions say? Well, they say, I'm going to throw this game against Liverpool, and I am going for it against Manchester United, which puts massive pressure on the game against Manchester United, because he better bloody win it.